start our, all right, there we go, sorry. So for those of you that I don't know, my name is Barb Clark, and I'm the Training and Exercise Manager here for the Intermountain Center for Disaster Preparedness, and we are located in Salt Lake City, Utah. If you're new to our organization, just a quick overview of the ICDP. We are a training and education center, and we not only provide educational opportunities like what we're doing here today, but we also help to create drills and exercises for organizations. We do research into the latest in disaster preparedness, and we help organizations with their disaster plans. I don't know about you guys, but I never thought at the beginning of this pandemic we'd be walking into year 3. We at the ICDP hope that you and your families are coping with all the changes that this virus has thrust upon us. And we're happy that you could join us in this virtual presentation and hope that you'll glean some insights into how others have dealt with or are dealing with crisis and disasters. A little bit of housekeeping here. If you registered for the presentation prior to 8 o'clock this morning, you should have received a link for a SurveyMonkey. This is our evaluation format. Please take a few minutes at the end of this presentation to complete that. Your thoughts really help us to continue to improve our course offerings. Please make sure your computer is on mute, and please change your name on the video feed to include your first and last name so that I can give you credit for attending. If you're not familiar with how to do that, just hover over your name under the participants, and you'll see a little button on the right-hand side that says More. Just click on that. It'll give you an option to rename. Also, if you're watching with a group, please either email me or place it in chat what your group name is and the number of folks attending. And if everyone in your group wants credit on Train, please make sure that you include their names as well. If you need a certificate of participation for this presentation, please email me. I'll make sure that the email is in the chat, but you've all received several emails from me up to this point, so you probably have that in your inbox somewhere. If you have questions during the presentation, please post them in the chat area. I'll be monitoring that. And if there's a critical question that needs clarification immediately, I will interrupt the speaker. But otherwise, we're going to wait till the end to ask questions. And at that time, I can either read your question or you can unmute yourself and ask directly. As I mentioned, this presentation is part of a series. The next Lunch and Learn will be held virtually on Wednesday, May 25th, again from 11:30 to 1300 Mountain Time. And that presentation will be done by the Individual and Community Preparedness Division of FEMA. We have 2 presenters that will discuss the importance of young people when building a culture of preparedness. So we hope you can join us for that. Again, thank you for your support of the Intermountain Center for Disaster Preparedness. And if we can be of service to you and your organizations, please feel free to reach out. We are here to help. And now, without further ado, let's get started. Sean Scott is a fire restoration contractor, consultant, and author, as well as columnist for the Restoration and Remediation magazine. 2 of his books, The Red Guide to Recovery, a resource handbook for disaster survivors, and Secrets of the Insurance Game, have received international attention as being key resources in helping people prepare for and recover from disasters of all sizes. John has spent the bulk of his 43-year career assisting individuals and families rebuild their homes and businesses after fires and floods and earthquakes and many other types of disasters. He's witnessed firsthand the physical, emotional, and financial challenges people face in the aftermath of fires, earthquakes, and countless incidents where people have lost their homes, never to return. As a result, Sean felt compelled to create an array of disaster preparedness and recovery tools to help people be better prepared and raise awareness of the many pitfalls that present themselves once the first responders leave the scene. So Sean's going to share a lot of that information with us. So please join me as we welcome Sean Scott.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you so much for taking the time to hear this talk about recovery and how to prepare for recovery. I wanted just to give you a little backstory of why I wrote the books and have done kind of what I'm doing now as far as helping peoples and communities to be better prepared. So in 2003, we had the Cedar Fire in San Diego County that devastated, 3,000 to 4,000 homes. Then in 2007, we had another wildfire called the Witch Creek and Harris Fire, which again burned about 1,500 to 2,000 homes. And in that 2007 wildfire, one of the homes that was destroyed was a dear family friend. And so he called and said, hey, we've lost everything. Could you come out to the house and, and help us out? So I get to the neighborhood, and there was not one house standing. It was like what you would see in like what's happened in Boulder, Colorado, or the Paradise Fire. And so, we're sifting through the ash to try to find his wife's wedding ring, and going through the process of his, insurance claim and, all those things. So fast forward 18 months later, he calls me and says, hey, we're having a housewarming party. Would you like to come and, and celebrate? So I said, sure. So I'm driving through the neighborhood with my wife, and we're looking around. This is 18 months after the event, and theirs is the only house rebuilt. And so I asked, my friend, I said, hey, Dan, what happened to your neighbors? And he said, well, the neighbor on my left got into a fight with their insurance company, lost their home, and moved away. And to this day, it's a vacant lot. And then he said, the neighbor on my right committed suicide. And when I heard that story, when I'm standing in this beautiful, custom home, I thought to myself, first my heart broke. I thought, geez, this is just horrific what has happened to this neighborhood, this community. But then I thought, if those people had had somebody like me in their life, or maybe a resource that could kind of be like a roadmap to teach them what to do, maybe their outcome and their story would have been different. And that's what compelled me to pretty much lay aside my restoration business for a few years and focus on helping people understand this concept and this issue of being able to recover from disasters. Okay, with that being said, I'm going to start the presentation here. 1 second. Get this here. Okay. So sharing my screen here. Okay, I'm assuming everybody can see the first slide. Barb?
Yep, you're all
Okay,
good.
we're good. Okay. Yep. So today's discussion, we're talking about the missing piece in the preparedness puzzle. Let's see here. Next slide. 1 second here. For some reason, I am trying to get my slides to move. Oh, here we go. Something is going wrong with the, okay, here we go. All right. So currently we have some, national messages. Red Cross has, get a kit, make a plan, be informed, ready, set, go, safety and fire prevention, turn around, don't drown, which is flood safety and survival. And then the great shakeouts about, earthquake, safety and survival. But none of these messages include anything about recovery. And then we have, the big push is, a lot of times you hear people, emphasizing the importance of getting a kit. But what, in my experience, that when you feel like the kit is the answer, it sort of psychologically checks a box that you've kind of done your thing as far as what you need to do to prepare, and you don't really need to focus too much further than this piece of it. But it could be, in my opinion, now don't get me wrong, kits are important to a certain degree in certain aspects. When you have to shelter in place, a kit could be great. But when I've experienced well over 10,000 different types of disasters of all shapes and sizes, I can tell you honestly that I've never met a family or a person where a kit made any difference whatsoever in their recovery. So could this be a preparedness placebo? Let's see, what in the world is going on here with these slides? I don't know why there we go. Okay, so the definition of a placebo, for those, just for curiosity. So it's from the 18th century Latin, or from the word placere, or to please. So it's a harmless pill, medicine, or procedures prescribed, more for the psychological benefit than for any physiological effect. It's a measure designed merely to calm or please someone. Or 3, a sham, substance or treatment which is designed to have no therapeutic value. So I'm not a real mean anti kit guy, but it's just something to think about, the whole placebo concept with these kits. Okay, so here we have a lighthouse that is in the middle of the ocean off of France, and you can see it's being battered by these giant waves. Now, most people looking at this would say, that's a pretty strong, structure to be able to withstand such, devastating blows from, this surf. But, would you say, that this lighthouse is disaster resistant or disaster resilient? So the word resistant is the ability to withstand. So obviously that lighthouse is strong; it can withstand the onslaught of those waves. But the term resilient means the ability to recover or rebound. So if that lighthouse ended up crashing into the water, I doubt seriously that it would be able to rebound. But both are equally important, to be resistant and resilient. So the typical preparedness mindset, most people think it won't happen. A disaster just won't happen, or it won't happen to me. If it happens, I'll deal with it then. If it happens, there's nothing I can do about it. If it happens, the government will take care of me or my insurance. And so I'm going to share with you a story. So this picture on the screen is my turtle tortoise, Harold. So years and years ago, my daughter, being 8 years old, said, "Oh, Dad, let's go to the pet shop. I just would love just to look. We're not going to buy anything. We're just going to look at the birds, etc." Well, and it ended up I get roped into buying this African sulcata tortoise, which of course, I'm responsible for taking care of now. But anyway, so he weighs about 80 pounds now, and when we first got him, he was probably all of 2 pounds. So yeah, he's quite large. But something happened very interesting. So when we went to the pet shop, I noticed, I was looking at the small turtles and tortoises, and this one was in this terrarium upside down. So of course, I kind of panicked, ran up to the cashier and said, "Hey man, you've got, baby turtles upside down in the water dish. They're going to drown and die." And he's like, "Sir," he kind of looked at me with one of those sort of condescending looks. He's like, "Did you see the message that was pasted on the front of the aquarium?" I said, "No." He goes, "Well, go back and read it." So I went back, and this is the message that was on the aquarium. It says here, "Turtles and tortoises have been roaming the earth for the last 200 million years and have learned how to upright themselves when turned over. Baby turtles and tortoises have not yet developed the muscle memory to upright themselves when flipped. This is why they struggle to turn over. This muscle memory is very important for them to develop before they become big, heavy adults. This is why every zoo in the world will let the animal figure it out naturally. We understand that it looks sad, but please try to separate your emotional response for an educated one." Really? So anyway, Harold never learned this behavior. We found him in the yard a couple times upside down, and he was frozen, and I thought he had died, but he did not have this muscle memory. He never learned how to recover. His whole life, somebody else came along and flipped him right, so he was never able to recover on his own. And that sort of correlates with a lot of us when it comes to disaster recovery. When life turns us upside down, most do not know how to right themselves. And that's why the message of recovery is so important, to give you guys the tools and people the tools so they know how to right themselves when life goes upside down. Okay, so disasters come in all shapes and sizes. So when we think of disasters, a lot of times we think of wide scale events like wildfires, hurricanes, earthquakes. But residential fires, as an example, the NFPA said there was roughly 350,000 reported in the United States. And then, of course, there's flooding. These floods can come from rivers, lakes, tidal surges, or other types of events where water gets in your house. Then, of course, then we have other unusual events, and I see a lot of this in my restoration business. So we have pipes that burst. We have hoses on washing machines that rupture. Toilets overflow. And here's a little mouse. And the reason I put this mouse in is I've had a number of insurance claims where a family would go to a vacation and then a mouse would get in the house and would chew a hole in that plastic ice maker line to the freezer, and it would run, for 2 weeks, solid. And by the time the family got home, there was mushrooms growing on the wall. So something as simple as just that little plastic line to your freezer ice maker can cause a tremendous amount of damage. So then the aftermath of mold, of course, or aftermath of water damage is often mold. Then there's weather-related disasters. In Utah, in the north, where you guys are, you know a lot about, heavy storms. There's tornadoes, hail. This is what happens when hail hits, devastates a house. This is probably golf ball to tennis ball size hail, I would say, hit this house. Trees that fall over with windstorms. I've seen lots of these. Then there's human-caused disasters, drunk drivers that hit houses. Then you have, factories, gas explosions, planes falling from the air. And here's a guy from Granby, Colorado, who got into a dispute with his neighbors and armor-plated a bulldozer and wiped out half the town. So yeah, there's all sorts of different kinds of situations that could cause you to be displaced and or lose your home. So whatever the cause, you're likely to face the following issues when it comes to a disaster: small or large. Displacement, relocation. Most likely you're not going to be able to stay in your house during the repairs. You got to make temporary repairs. That means board up, covering the roof, temporarily repairing storm or fire related damage to keep looters and people out. Filing an insurance claim. Salvaging or moving your personal property. Opportunists and scams. Lots of that goes on, because keep in mind, after disaster, people from out of town will be looking for a piece of that insurance money. So opportunists and scams are pervasive in every disaster scenario. And the bottom line is, you're on your own. When the first responders leave the scene, they have to go back into service and be ready for the next call. They cannot help you with the recovery process. They have to be ready on the response side. And in most cases, in the midst of turmoil, people feel lost. They're psychologically and emotionally compromised for quite some time. So this is a process. This is a marathon, not a foot race. Nothing happens quickly. And so you have to condition yourself to know that it's going to be a long haul, long process. So then I'd like to share with you a little bit about post-fire dangers. So this is actually a garage where somebody was living in, and this is one of my projects. And I wanted just to show you, just briefly, in the background, you can see there's a surfboard, there's a sofa, there's any number of musical instruments, lots of plastic. So it's probably safe to say that the combustion byproducts of all these items that have burned probably made some pretty nasty smoke, soot, ash, and particulate. This is not an area where you want to go in there unprotected without, a Tyvek suit, respirator, etc. This is another fire I've been involved with, and again, just shows you the vast array of different things that you might have in your garage. And in this case, this fellow was a diver, and a tremendous amount of lead weights and other things vaporized in the fire. So lots of plastics. That little drone that is sitting in the middle of the screen is the charger for that drone is what caused this fire. So kind of crazy. Okay, so what message was missed here? So here we have 4 images. Here's a girl with a bike, here is, little kids, with their bicycle. Here's a toddler getting his hands into the ash. Obviously, these people were allowed back into these neighborhoods, and I don't know that anybody really told them the risks they were running by being here unprotected. Here's a gal in flip-flops. So it's common for there to be puncture wounds for people who walk around after wildfires, because the bottom plate of the walls typically remain and the nails stick straight up. And so this is very, very dangerous environment for that reason, as well as getting ash on your skin and in your eyes, and breathing it, etc. So as I was doing my research on a couple of my papers about the toxicity of smoke, I ran across an article, a story about a surgeon from the 1700s named Percival Pott. And he was the first scientist to discover a correlation between a condition called soot wart and chimney sweeps. So chimney sweeps back then, you would use orphans, usually 4, 5, 6-year-old little kids, and then hoist them down into the chimneys to sweep them out. And as a result, within a few years, these children were developing these cancers in their groin area known as soot wart, which is now known as squamous cell carcinoma. And a lot of these children did not live till their teens because of exposure to creosote, soot, char, and ash, and those types of products that were found in these chimneys even back then. This is pre-plastic. This is, pre-chemicals. This is just from burning wood or coal. So how do toxins enter the body? So ingestion, skin contact, inhalation. And when you put something on your skin, it only takes a few seconds for that substance to enter your bloodstream. You may have seen some of these YouTube videos on these officers who have found fentanyl in different drug houses or in the back of a car, and within seconds they're experiencing seizures. So your skin reacts very quickly to anything that's applied to it. And toxins can get into your system through your eyes. So to give you an idea of what we're dealing with in size, when you're talking about particulate matter, so a human hair is about 75 microns. If you look at the sun that goes through a sunlit window and you see the little particles floating around, those are about 40 microns. Then red blood cells, 7 to 8, and then E. coli is about 2. However, smoke particulate can be less than 1 micron, which means your lungs don't have the capability of trapping these particles. These particles, which can be laden with heavy metals, dioxins, and other nasty chemicals, can go right into your bloodstream. And so that's how small smoke particulate after a wildfire or a structure fire can be. So here's a gentleman who was allowed back into his home. You can look on the floor after a fire. You can see there's foam that was used to extinguish the fire, but you can imagine the immense amount of chemicals and things that he's exposing himself to by breathing, getting on his skin. But here's a short list of just a few items, a few chemicals. So dioxins, very common in most structure fires. Furans, sulfur dioxide, hydrochloric acid, arsenic, mercury, lead, asbestos, etc. And at the end, I put hydrogen cyanide and phosgene. These are two that are common when insulation, wool, anything that's wool burns, even wool carpet, wool sweaters. To give you an idea, so one of the primary byproducts of a wool sweater when it burns is hydrogen cyanide. And so to give you an idea how toxic it is, both phosgene and hydrogen cyanide are common in structure fires, but were both used as chemical warfare agents in World War I. So these are not chemicals you want to mess with. So then in the United States, there's over 7 million mixture formulations that are found in homes and buildings across the United States. Most chemicals in commercial use haven't been tested. The toxins created in a structure fire are innumerable, and cigarette smoke alone has roughly 7,000 different chemicals that have been identified. So you can imagine when a sofa or a widescreen TV or some of the items that you have in your home, especially in a garage setting, when all of that stuff burns and mixes together, that it can be pretty intense, pretty toxic. Okay, so now we're talking a little bit about disaster safety. So now, typically after a wildfire event, when the city, county, or state gets involved, they'll send out contractors to look for household chemicals, batteries, etc. But notice how they're dressed. They're all wearing full Tyvek suits, hard hats, gloves, respirators, the whole 9 yards. However, when people are allowed into their communities in this particular picture, if you look in the background, you'll notice there's an active fire. There's an active flame there. So why this lady was allowed in this house this early is alarming. But it just goes to show you. Now, these pictures I'm going to show you are very common when you Google wildfire recovery or aftermath. Here's a couple of gentlemen that are obviously sifting through their personal effects. Again, common denominator, no personal protective equipment whatsoever. Now here's a gal, and I put a red circle. You can look at her hand and her legs. She's covered in ash and soot. So in this scenario, typically, this woman was probably told by her insurance company that she needs to document all of her personal property that was lost, take pictures. And so she'll probably be in and out of her home for, probably a couple of weeks trying to inventory everything that was lost. Now, here's a couple that seem to be know something a little bit more than the others. Now, they're wearing, pretty much the full gamut of personal protective equipment. This is what most people should be wearing, is this type of garb, as well as, covering your head and your hair and your face with a full face mask. So arsenic is something that is more common than you think. Wanted to just mention it briefly. So pressure treated lumber is used in most houses in the United States whenever wood comes in contact with concrete or masonry. It's impregnated with a preservative called chromated copper arsenate, which that was used prior to 2004. Now they have another derivative, but still has arsenic in it. When this wood burns, the arsenic is released and it becomes part of the ash and the soot. So heavy metals is a common toxin that's found after fires. Now here's something you probably rarely hear about. So we're going to talk a little bit about dioxins. So dioxins are created when wood, household, and petroleum products combust, plastics, especially PVC. It's an unintentional byproduct of combustion, especially when fires are not intensely hot. So anything under about 1500 degrees can create dioxin. A lot of folks are in the rural areas are used to using burn barrels to burn their household waste. And there's a lot of flyers out there from states, cities, and counties that, basically encourage people not to burn their trash in a burn barrel mainly because of how much dioxins it creates. So a little bit about dioxin. It's over 170,000 times more toxic than cyanide, 500,000 times more toxic than arsenic. It's second only to radioactive waste. They can remain in your body up to 12 years. They alter the genetic structure of living cells. It's a key ingredient in Agent Orange. They cause cancer and birth defects. They enhance the activity of other carcinogens, and there is no acceptable level of exposure. So as far as OSHA is concerned, dioxins has no permissible exposure limit. So relief volunteers are at risk. So the photo in the top left corner, here you have guys in full, almost HAZWOPER level, suits, treating this like, it's a radioactive spill. But the Team Rubicon guy is, maybe wearing a dust mask and just kind of standing there, watching things. The people in the upper right hand corner, here's two young ladies that are in a structure fire, and there above them is probably a steel beam that probably weighs 10 tons, and they have no hard hats on. This is super dangerous environment. Bottom two photos are Red Cross volunteers. Again, being in a structure that is this compromised, there's risk of collapse, risk of items falling on you, breathing the particulate and dust. So there's some messaging that needs to be conveyed to our brave volunteers that they need to take the proper precautions when they walk into these buildings that are affected by fire. And they just need to wear proper PPE mainly. Okay, smoke damaged textiles. So in the insurance restoration industry, if you had clothing that was contaminated with asbestos, lead, mold, bloodborne pathogens, sewage, the adjusters typically consider those items a total loss. So there's no question, they're not going to try to force you to have them laundered, cleaned, and sanitized. It's just, they just automatically, pretty much throw it away. However, when you have clothes that are exposed to some of the most toxic chemicals on the planet, like that we've just been discussing, when they're exposed to VOCs, PCBs, heavy metals, dioxin, they end up at the dry cleaner. Supposedly they can all be restored perfectly, sanitized and clean. So I was a little skeptical of these comments. So I went to this fire and noticed there was piles of clothes. And so I conducted an experiment. In the middle of the screen, you'll see there's a little red onesie, bright red. So I took this little onesie and 3 or 4 other articles, and I sent them to a lab. Well, actually, I sent them to a textile restoration company to have this item clean. So this is what it looked like when I pulled it out of off the sofa. You can obviously see some pretty heavy staining. So then I gave it to this company. They guaranteed me they could clean it. They took it, and when it came back, it looked like this. Now that looks pretty good. It's got the little dry cleaner tag on it. It actually smelled amazing, like you would expect from Tide or Downy or one of these commercial laundry soaps. And I thought, yeah, that's pretty good. But I was still suspicious, so I sent this item to a forensic laboratory in Michigan and had them analyze. Specifically, I asked, I said, well, you probably won't find much, but I just am curious if you'll find any combustion byproducts, heavy metals, VOCs in this garment. I had it cleaned by a professional company, and they said, sure, we'll take a look. So they took it, and after about 3 weeks, and I got it back, these were all the chemicals that were found in that baby onesie, not to mention heavy metals, including lead, arsenic, chromium-52, and cobalt-59. So what that led me to believe is that the cleaning process does not work or did not work. And the fragrances used in the laundry detergent was nothing more than camouflage that was covering all of these nasty chemicals that were in the garment. So needless to say, would you let one of your little ones wear that onesie? I would venture to say no. So, and by the way, since then, I've had countless other garments tested from other fires where a cleaning company attempted to clean them, and they have never once come back free of combustion byproducts. So that process, in my opinion, doesn't work. Okay, pitfalls and predators. So after disaster, and when the response phase is over, you're going to get a deluge of people from all over that are looking to capitalize on people's misfortune. So the restoration industry is a multi-billion-dollar industry, and so there's all sorts of folks that are going to be looking for, the contract to rebuild your home, to clean up, to do the debris removal, handle your contents, etc. So, and everybody seems to want to help. You got public adjusters, contractors, flood dry out companies, general contractors, all sorts of folks. And then you have con artists who pose as volunteers or relief workers. Then they use high pressure sales tactics, fear, greed, and freebies. So I underlined the word freebies for a reason. So a lot of times when you come into an area that has been affected by a wide scale disaster where hundreds or thousands of homes have been destroyed, one of the tactics is to make people believe that if you don't act quickly, then the contractor will have to take somebody else and you'll never get service. And one of the other things that they'll do is offer you, a free trip to Hawaii if you give them the job, or they will come out and do a free estimate, or they'll do some minor cleanup for free. And what people don't realize is anytime somebody gives you something for free, it instills in you a feeling of obligation. Hey, this person came out at 5 in the morning and boarded up my house or cleaned up this debris. The least that I can do is give them a chance to bid on the house. So now they've got a toehold in the door. The fear factor is, the greed factor is where somebody will offer money for the job, and some people who are limited income might be willing to take that offer of $5,000 if they get the job of the rebuilding. So there's all sorts of games that are played post-disaster. And predators bank on survivors being uninformed. That's the key, is the lack of knowledge is what causes survivors to evolve into victims. And the most vulnerable are the elderly, low-income families, people with language barriers, and those with cognitive or functional disabilities. So then we have shady movers. So people who've had smoke damage or say a flood, one of the first phases is to hire a company to move your personal property to a secure facility while the repairs are being done. Well, what happens often in situations with insurance is that these companies will come out and charge anywhere between $30,000 to $50,000 to move all of your stuff, maybe just a couple miles away and store it in their facility. It's not like some of the major national movers who will move you to New York City for $5,000. This is next level expensive. Now, here's the thing: if the insurance company balks at the bill that the moving company has had you sign their contract for, you may be on the hook for any amount that the insurance company doesn't pay. And if that happens, if the moving company has left your stuff in a storage unit, they simply will stop paying the storage fees, and then it ends up on a show like Storage Wars, and people just basically get your stuff. So you have companies out there that are predatory, that are looking for the contract to move and hold and store your personal property. And in my experience, a lot of these companies hire temporary laborers who oftentimes are ex-convicts that oftentimes will take things that don't belong to them out of people's storage units. So this is a scary, scary phase of the recovery process. So now, where do the predators find their prey? Well, town hall meetings is a big one. They'll sit in listening, trying to target the low-hanging fruit. Disaster shelters, town hall meetings, assistance seminars, and they target the weak and convince them to trust. So the word con artist is a derivative of the word convince. So when somebody is a con artist, they are a master at convincing you to trust them. So when you get into a setting where you've got somebody that is telling you everything you want to hear and offering, services at the cheapest price, where it's too good to be true, a lot of times these are tactics, carefully orchestrated tactics to get you to convince them to trust. So disaster chasers use technology today. They have the same information as bounty hunters, debt collection agencies, and private investigators. There's a website you can go to called truthfinder.com, and for a couple dollars, if you put in your own name, you will be shocked on how much information is available on the internet about you and your family members. So now we get to take a break and play a little game. So here we have three individuals. One of them is a convicted con artist. So in the chat box, if you can take just a second, and if some of you wouldn't mind, tell me which contestant, 1, 2, or 3, is the con artist. Okay, well, I hate to break it to you, but all three of them are. So what we're going to focus on for a minute is the contestant number 1 on the far left. Now, this is an actual news story from the Santa Barbara Independent newspaper on January 8th, 2014. It says here, between April 2009 and May 2012, Penny Estes, and this is her, scammed 10 Santa Barbara homeowners who lost their houses in the T and Jesucita wildfires out of millions of dollars, promising to rebuild their homes and spending much of their money on hotels, restaurants, shopping, and travel. She and her company, Green Building America, reportedly received $4.87 million from the contracts, which either went over budget, were never completed, or both. Estes was arrested and charged with 25 felony counts of grand theft, obtaining services by false pretenses, diversion of construction funds, and a slew of tax violations. Many of those charges carry special allegations that she preyed on senior citizens and victims of natural disasters. Most of the victims handed over all their insurance money, and many dipped into their savings. When things started to go sideways, homeowners hired lawyers but found little to no success. Kay Hillary, 77, and Robert Hillary, 85, and these are the Hillarys in court, testified how Estes swindled them out of $536,000 that Estes used to set up her operation. Kay said that Estes preyed on her and her husband and even brought flowers to Robert in the hospital following his back surgery. Estes was sentenced to 11 years, 8 months in prison. So my question for all of you is, do you think that these people will ever see a penny of their money? Absolutely not. Now, could it have been avoided? Absolutely. Had these people not given her their insurance proceeds, they wouldn't be in this position. But they got convinced that this woman was going to take care of them. So here's a few hours after the Moore, Oklahoma tornadoes. What are these guys doing? Caught looting, looking for jewelry, looking for safes, looking for any valuables, while the police aren't around. Here is a guy, if you look at the bottom there where his shoes are, he's got a blue plastic tub with some kind of cutters. This guy was going around stealing the copper pipes from the water pipes from the homes to take it for recycling. Here's a guy who had 18 aliases who was busted. He was a furniture and personal property moving company, and he would just take people's stuff and steal right out of them. So what do scam victims have in common? So all of you who have a smartphone, when I'm done with the end of these lines in this slide, you need to take a picture of it because I really want you guys to remember this. So number one, scam victims do not recognize common persuasion tactics. They hush the logical voice of reason inside them. They rush into making important decisions. And remember what we talked about, you're emotionally and psychologically compromised after a disaster. You're in no position to make a financial decision for quite some time after the event. They are alone or isolated in some way. They are afraid of being rude or confrontational. They get emotional and succumb to fear or greed. And lastly, they fear retribution if they call police or authorities. So I'm going to leave this slide up just for a minute, just so you guys have a chance to take a picture. I think that Barb said that this may be available so you guys can see this later. But this is really a key slide that just illustrates how vulnerable disaster survivors can be. Okay, talking a little bit now about the insurance claim process. So survivors need to be very careful when you're dealing with the insurance process. Lots of landmines and problems and issues here. So good insurance is your recovery lifeline. If you don't have insurance, you're going to be in a world of trouble when it comes time to trying to rebuild your house, unless you're extremely wealthy. So do you know what your policy covers and the limits? So think about this. How many of you who own or rent a home who have insurance have actually taken that policy, read it cover to cover, and know exactly what you're covered for, what's excluded, and what all of your limits are? Now, typically when I do presentations to large audiences, I'll get 1 or 2 max in a room of 300-400 people who've ever actually read their policy. You need to read it because you'll be surprised what it doesn't cover. So don't trust agents' formulas. You could end up short. So spend some time, read that policy, and ask questions. So here's some statistics from some of the wildfires that have happened over the last 10, 12 years. So 2007, 66 reported being underinsured by an average of 319,000. 76% experienced lowballing. 2011, Bastrop, Texas. 56 reported being underinsured by 110,000. 80% were underinsured on personal property by 97,000. These statistics came from United policyholders. You can see all of these and even more current ones at uphelp.org. 2013, the Black Forest wildfire in Colorado. 46% reported they were underinsured. 59% reported they were unable to replace their belongings. 2015, Butte, California, 65% reported they were underinsured, 69% reported they were unable to replace their belongings. And lastly, 2017, again, 66% reported they were underinsured, 31% reported receiving lowball estimate settlement offers. Guys and girls, I'm telling you, I can't emphasize enough, your insurance policy is your lifeline. You need to get acquainted with it, get familiar with the terms, ask questions, and ask a local contractor. If your house burned down to the ground, how much would it cost? And then compare that to rebuild it, and compare that with your policy. Okay. So, for example, here's a house that was undermined by a flooded river. Is this covered in insurance, your typical homeowner's insurance? Well, no, unless you have a special endorsement for flood. Earth movement, again, typically not covered. This was a landslide. Mud flows or water that comes from surface flooding, again, typically not covered. So here's a house that was in Granby, Texas, I believe it was. So it was a tornado wiped it out. So in this situation, when you file a claim, your insurance adjuster is going to ask you, for an inventory of all your personal property. Well, if you're standing here and this is your home and you're looking and the only thing you recognize that belonged to you is that pair of pants hanging in that tree across the street, you're going to be in a world of trouble because your insurance adjuster doesn't know what you had. You don't know what you had. So how will you be able to maximize that portion of your policy? Because your policy is broken down into coverage for the dwelling, which is rebuilding the structure, coverage for your personal property, that's your contents, and you have another coverage for additional living expenses, and then you have one for debris removal. So you have all these little buckets in your policy. One of them happens to be for personal property. So I want to ask you this. This is a drawer in my house. So what I did is I went into this one utensil drawer, went online and priced every single thing in this drawer. So would you think that this was $385 worth of value, more or less? Well, it was actually more. It was $844.70. So when I saw the tally, I looked at my wife, I'm like, damn, I'm like, how could there be almost $1,000 in plastic spoons, whisks, and spatulas in this one drawer? So it kind of was shocking. Then there's this slide. Now I'm just going to preface this one. This is not a drawer at my house, but this is a great illustration of what some people might have. So this is a cosmetic drawer, and if you notice, this drawer is specifically for lips. So it's got lip gloss, lip liner, lipstick. So my wife knew exactly kind of what a lot of these brands were, and so she was able to go online and find Neiman Marcus, Nordstrom, Yves Saint Laurent. I mean, there's all sorts of fancy stuff in this drawer. So would you think that this was $1,871 worth of value in this one drawer? More or less. And so after she tallied it, it actually came out to $4,698.18. So now what's crazy is if you were to tell an insurance adjuster, oh yeah, I had $4,700 worth of just lipstick in my top drawer in my vanity, he or she would probably think that you're committing insurance fraud. But the point here is that you have no idea how much you've accumulated in your home that has a value. Even if some of these things you don't use anymore, they still, in a insurance claim environment, have a replacement value. So keep in mind that little things add up to a lot. So one of the keys to being able to recover the full value of what you had in your home is to document your home. Now, this happens to be a picture of what is called a Matterport camera. This creates a 3D image of your entire home. You can, hire someone to come and do a Matterport scan of your home, which I think is the best technology there is for what we're talking about today. Also, you can just use your cell phone and take a video. That works. And get, open the drawers, take pictures and video of everything that you can, and then store those images in the cloud. If you ever have a disaster, that documentation is going to be the key for you to get the maximum benefits of your insurance. So here are some takeaways. So review your insurance policy and be sure it's adequate. Assess your exposures to disaster risks inside and out. So we talked about the mouse that ate the hole into the plastic ice maker line. If you have one of those plastic ice maker lines, replace it with copper as soon as possible. And then have a plumber check your supply lines and angle stops under your sinks and toilets and any other plumbing fixtures to make sure that they're not corroded and ready to burst. Outside, make sure you have defensible space. Get rid of anything that's combustible if you're in a wildfire prone area that's too close to the house. Create an inventory of your personal property. Document your property with photos and a 3D scan. Get personal protective equipment. Make a disaster recovery plan. So these items here, again, this could be a nice thing, slide for you to take another picture with your smartphone. Because if you prepare for the likely, you'll be prepared for the unlikely. And so this is sort of like the main key takeaways of this little presentation. I know I kind of flew through this thing. Barb, how are we doing on time?
You're doing great. You're at 12:23 right now. So
Okay, so I'm just going to play one YouTube video, if that's okay. And let's see here. Let me just go to.
nothing's playing, Sean.
Oh, it's not?
Nope.
Okay. So you can't see it or hear it?
We can see the cover, Dan's story, but you might
Oh.
need to stop sharing and then start sharing again once you.
Okay, I apologize for that. So let me, hold on, let me just exit full screen. Okay, so share. New share. Here we go. How about a new share? That works. Does this work?
Now it's working.
There's no sound.
Yeah, there's no audio.
No audio. Okay. You know what? We'll just pass on this. So anyway, sorry about that. I thought that we could get that to work, but I guess not. Okay, so we're back to this. Can you see this slide?
Yes.
Okay. All right, so this is the end. So 2 types of people emerge from disaster, survivors and victims, and a little knowledge can make all the difference. So yeah, so these are the covers of the 2 books I've written. The Red Guided Recovery is something that the fire departments in many areas are keeping on their vehicles to hand to people after structure fires. And some emergency management agencies at the county, city, and state levels keep them in supply to hand out at disaster recovery workshops and local assistance centers. So it's great, you know, after the 07 wildfires, when this happened, I wrote the book and then I printed 12 copies. I presented these books to our County Fire Chiefs Association and just asked them, I said, hey, if I could find funding for this, would you give this to people for free after a disaster? And about a month later, I got a call back from the president of the association, fire chief, and he said, you know what, we love this and we have a funding source. So they found Homeland Security grant funds, the Red Cross, and our local utility provider provided the funding so that it could be put on every fire truck and with our tribal nations throughout San Diego County. And so it was a tremendous, and I thought, wow, I'm done. I left my mark on the community. Well, then the governor of California's office called and they wanted it in all 58 counties. So then it went statewide. And since then it's gone across the United States. So it's a great resource that, you know, that helps people rebuild their lives after they've lost everything, because most people have never experienced a disaster before and have no idea what to do. So from a preparedness perspective, having this knowledge and knowing how to prepare for recovery ahead of time is absolutely the key to resiliency. So here's my contact information, my phone and email. If anybody has any questions, you know, later on they want to ask, you know, this is my information. You can contact me. And then, so Barb, why don't we shift it over to you so that you can do some Q&A time.
All right, sounds great. Thank you for that presentation, Sean. A lot of great information in there. Does anyone have any questions that you would like to ask? You can go ahead and unmute if you would like and ask your question, or if you'd prefer, you can put it in the chat. So while we're waiting for people to think about it, Sean, have you ever, when you were talking about testing that little onesie, have you ever tested firefighter turnouts after they've been washed in their in the washers at the stations?
Well, it's funny you say that because there's a CBS News, CBS This Morning news article that there's a lawsuit that's been started in Boston, I think. The firefighters are realizing that there's toxins that are actually in the fabric of the turnout gear. But to answer your question directly, I don't think anybody's ever tested turnout gear after it's been cleaned to see if it's actually clean. I would doubt seriously, given how toxic some of the fires are that these guys go into and gals go into. I would bet money that they're not safe.
Yeah, I would bet it too. I used to love the smell of my turnouts after a fire, but you know, when you think about how bad that is for you,
Right?
then, you know, maybe get them washed that day. Maybe it takes a couple days to get them washed. Yeah, not a good deal.
Yeah, it's really not. Really not.
Does anyone else have a question? I'm putting some links in the chat here right now. So
Yeah, somebody asked for a link to the
YouTube
video, so I'll grab that. Let's see here.
Did you want the YouTube video from the Dan story, or did you want the YouTube where this is going to be posted?
I think I'm just going to send it to everyone. This is the one, it's called Dan's Story.
Okay.
And there's the testimonial there. And there's also another couple of videos on my channel of fire chiefs' testimonies of how they use the guide and how it helps their communities. So it's really something that, you know, first responders, you know, have their job, but they really can't leave survivors empty-handed. They're so vulnerable and they're so at risk of all sorts of predators and problems with insurance. I mean, there's just too many things that could cause somebody to become victimized. And I just implore people, like, if there's a way to deploy this resource into the local communities, you know, I've gotten creative and found partners and stuff, but it's really a godsend for most people. So.
Absolutely. Ashley is asking, are public adjusters a scam generally, or do people sometimes find them useful?
Well, they have their place. So what I tell people about public adjusters is I said, look, give your insurance company a chance to make you whole. And if you're not happy with that settlement or that offer, you can negotiate to a certain degree on your own. And then if you still run into a hitch, you can always hire one later. But if you hire one day one of your disaster, you're going to give that public adjuster a portion of money you probably would have got without their help. So why give away that 10 or 15% on the front end until you know whether or not you even need them?
And then Lillian is asking, are your books in any other languages or in Braille by any chance?
Yeah, so we did it in Braille and Spanish for the city of Los Angeles. It's quite an undertaking. The Braille book ended up having to be in 4 volumes that were literally like 18 inches by 18 inches. It was incredible what it took to do that. The Spanish version was a little simpler. The challenge there is there's a few different dialects. There's Mexico Spanish and Spain Spanish. But yes, we have the capacity to do other languages, but it has to be a very large quantity to make it worthwhile.
James is asking, hang tight. Can you speak more to the preparedness placebos you see in other ways? Any suggestions on what needs to change in the preparedness messaging to overcome the common placebo effect?
Well, I think that the messaging just needs to evolve to where, you know, is to explain that a kit is good in certain situations, you know, certain scenarios, like I'd mentioned, you know, sheltering in place, civil unrest, COVID-19, where you're basically home, and if you run out of supplies, it can come in handy. A kit itself, a little backpack kit, is really only good for like your car. You should definitely have, I would say, some food, 3 days, maybe water. And that's just a good survival measure. But to change the concept about the placebo is getting people to read their insurance policy, to realize the areas of vulnerability in their personal life where that goes beyond what a kit can provide. And so that's like another presentation, that I've done altogether, is drilling down into what that looks like so that you're truly prepared for recovery. So I hope that, somewhat answers the question, James. But I'd love to talk to you more about that, one-on-one. We can have a phone call or you can email or something. But oh, so someone says they'd like to see the victim screen again. Okay, we can put that up. Anybody else have any questions?
We've got a couple more minutes here, so if you'd like to unmute, you're welcome to, or we can read it from the chat. Could you tell us the name of that photo equipment again?
Oh, yes, it's called a Matterport scan.
Like M-A-T-T-E-R?
M-A-T-T-E-R-P-O-R-T, Matterport. Let's see here, share screen. So let me just go back to that. Okay, sorry guys, I just got to get this, there it is. Okay, I think this is the one they were asking for. There, is that the one you needed?
Yes, that was it. Thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome. Yeah, so I would love to, if anybody has any, questions, we got a few minutes. I'd love to, share. I know I kind of went fast. There's a lot of, information to get into a small amount of time. So I hope this was was helpful to everybody and informative. And yeah, I mean, I'm just here if you guys have any further questions and want to talk about how to build more resiliency and strength in your community, we can definitely share some ideas and some strategies.
I am not seeing any more questions in the chat.
A quick question, if you can hear me.
Yep, we can.
Okay. So I work at the public health department down here in Southwest Utah. And so where, the fire is what made me kind of think of it, where we're consistently looking for ways to expand our reach in preparedness, because I'm specifically in emergency preparedness for the health department. What would you recommend are some ways to help prepare people in the community, from the public health side of things, and prepare them to know what to expect, or how they can then prepare if they have a better idea of what's coming?
Well, from your perspective, I would think that one common denominator that I see in most post-wildfire events is that families and residents are allowed to re-enter their communities prematurely, or they are being told that it is safe to return. It's not safe. There needs to be messaging to explain the importance of PPE, protecting themselves, because they're going to be in there rummaging through the ash, and they're going to have their kids and their dogs. And then the people who haven't had a home burned down need to be made aware that the soot, char, and ash is toxic, and it needs to be handled, correctly, so that they don't have a continual indoor air quality problem and contamination. So what people don't realize is when a home burns to the ground, you've got all this stuff that's vaporized and becomes part of that toxic smoke. And then that particulate, is driven by wind, which ends up in people's attic spaces. It gets pushed down into the wall cavities. So it's a challenge to, to really clean up. So there is a big public health element to educating disaster survivors on how to be safe in the days, weeks, and months after the event.
So Sean, we've got a couple more questions here.
Okay.
Is there a checklist that you have to help make sure that people's insurance is adequate?
I don't, but that would be really easy for me to put something like that together. Yeah, I mean, the main thing is having a contractor tell you who's local what it would take to rebuild your home from the ground up per square foot is a great start. So if they say it's going to be $400 a square foot and you live in a 2,000 square foot home, you're looking at $800,000, you're going to need for coverage, right? So a lot of policies, they just sell you a cheap policy because it has a low premium, but when you need it, it's not there for you. You can't, rebuild with what's, remaining.
Here's another question about insurance related to the inflation in the housing market. Do insurance policies typically flex up to include that, or are people underinsured on their policy? Say a home's $200,000.
It depends. Some do flex up, but it's incumbent on the insured to notify the insurer if they've made improvements to the home, added a room, put a second story. If your original policy covered a house that was 1,500 square feet and you added 500 square feet and the insurance company doesn't know about it, well, that would be your fault that you didn't notify them that the structure was more valuable and larger.
Yeah, I just did a reboot with my insurance company because the housing market, the value of the home went up so much.
Yeah.
Yeah. This other question, how long will it be? How long, I guess, will it take for it to be safe to get in? I'm assuming this question, Karina, is about after a fire. Is that correct?
Well, so that's the challenge. So every fire has its own DNA. If you say, for instance, we're cooking chicken on the stove, like chicken Kiev, and it turned into chicken Chernobyl. I mean, the bottom line is that's a protein fire. So the amount of toxic combustion byproducts from burnt chicken is a lot different than a car that exploded in a garage, and you have gasoline and benzene and all these household chemicals. So it's kind of relative to the type of fire, how long it burned. There's a lot of different factors that go into that. So it's impossible to say, oh yeah, 24 hours, you're good to go. It just depends on the situation.
All right, any other questions?
I mean, there's a lot here, everybody, and I really appreciate, so many people attending this because, we literally could do, presentations and talks, lunch and learns on, any one of the given topics. We could have one devoted just 100% to insurance, one to about scam prevention, one to, safety. I mean, there's so much here that applies to a wide range of topics within the recovery process that it would, this 1 hour that we spent together is just sort of like giving you guys a taste of what, people need to know.
Absolutely. Well, Sean, thank you so much. Like you said, there was so much information there. It was very, very informative. Thank you all for joining us today. And Sean shared his contact info. If you would like to get a hold of him, please do so. I will be sending out a follow-up once I get this posted on our YouTube channel, and I can include his contact information again then if you weren't able to.
Oh, I forgot one thing. Everybody, when you have a chance, just visit my website, which is theredguidetorecovery.com. There's a tab that says free tools. In that tab, you'll see a wealth of articles, PDFs, different types of things for preparedness and recovery that I've written that will really help you, your family, your friends and colleagues. So I'm going to put the website in the chat here.
Oh, great. I was just doing that. Is that it?
Yeah.
Yep. Okay, great. Yes, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. And if anybody has, questions that, talk about maybe if they want more information about the Red Guide to Recovery, how it's used, who uses it, what it's, achieving in the in our country, feel free to reach out. I'd love to talk to you.
Awesome. All right. Well, again, if you want a certificate of participation for today, please email me at barb.clark@imail.org. And please take a few minutes to answer our survey questions. I sent you all the link. If you did not receive that link this morning, please let me know. There's a couple of you that I didn't have on the roster, or some of you actually didn't have a current email on the train system, so they did bounce back to me. So if you would like that survey list, or survey link, please email me as well. So, all right. Well, thank you again, everybody. Stay safe, stay healthy, and hopefully we'll see you at future ICDP courses. Again, the next Lunch and Learn is May 25th, I think. Did I say? I think it's the 25th. Yeah. So thank you again. And Sean, thank you. And everyone, take care.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.